Good morning or good afternoon, depending on wherever you're logging in from. And thanks for joining me again. We got some things to go over this time, continuing on our journey through Paul's letters to the churches. Today, we're going to go over one of the letters that some people would consider one of the most insignificant letters, because they would actually suggest that maybe the church at Colossae was one of the most insignificant churches. But that's that's not really fair, because there's actually some very let's say deep information that you could actually extract out of the church at Colossae and from the letter to the Colossians that is extremely palpable to what's going on today in the condition of spirituality and the way people view it through social media, like through TikTok, YouTube, all of this stuff, and the way that people have started to kind of cram ideas together, which is not a new thing at all, which we'll come to find out, but how it's still occurring. So what Paul said to this, so-called insignificant church with this insignificant letter is extremely significant to us today, specifically. And we'll talk about it right now. So this is the overview for Paul's letter to the Colossians. It was written approximately 62 to 63 years after the death of Jesus, which is around 1,897 years ago. And like I said about all of the letters that Paul wrote, that's a long time for a document to survive, even if it is the copy. And if you have a problem with only the copies surviving and not the originals, well, then you might just want to wipe out most of the things you know about popular history, because that's the way it all has occurred, for one reason or another. Nevertheless, we do have it, thank God, because it gives us something to reflect on, and it gives us an insight into this man's experience with the Holy Spirit and what he did. And what he did, you can find most of it in the book of Acts. So let's go to the map like we always do. This is Colossae, that dot right up under there. That's Colossae. It's in what we would call today Turkey. At that time, it was not known as Turkey, obviously. So this is some archaeological sites. That's what Colossae looked like from a long time ago. This is the sites they've started to excavate and pull the old city out. And in a lot of my old Bible studies, you'll see that a lot of these old cities, they're up on a hill like that. I remember Jericho was, can't remember the name of the other site, but it was right around Jericho. But anyway, they're built on these giant mounds, which is really interesting. Some more of that very typical architecture with the pillars there. And I believe this is a map for you to have whenever you're going on your little tour around Colossae. They kind of try to show you the pieces and the sections of the city that would have been broken up into. And as you're walking around that wasteland, that desolate place, that you would find these little areas. Okay, let's get into it. In Acts 19, it says that everybody in Asia had eventually heard the gospel. And if you look, this is the Asia that they're talking about. And I've been over this before, but I want to reiterate, we're not talking about Asia in the Far East, okay, where, there's China, Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Russia, all that, India. It's not talking about that Asia. It's talking about this little area right here. And look, Colossae falls in there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just on this one section right here, this one verse, and then we're going to kind of go down a rabbit hole to learn some things. And this is the stuff that's extremely relevant to us today. So let's go ahead and talk about it. In Colossians chapter 2, in verse 18, he writes to them, "Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind." What's he talking about here? This to me this is what all of the whole Colossians letter should be centered around. Because in Colossae, there was something called the cult of the angels. It was common in much of the heathen world, but all of it has its roots in Egypt. In Egypt. And what does it really focus on? It focuses on the celestial bodies like the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, angels themselves, kind of redirecting what angels are and what they accomplish under God's commands, and also what the celestial bodies do and what kind of significance they should have to us as people, not as just a sign and a calendar and all that stuff, but they believed in all types of powers, okay, and believed that they were to be worshipped. And outside of the cult of angels, it's also very similar to the cult of the sun and the moon, which also has its ties into MITHRAISM. And all that stuff has this center point of this type of language that said, you know, the universe spoke to me. And I know that anytime you scroll through social media down in the comments, or you're watching the videos of these pseudoscientists or pseudo-religious people, and they've got the rocks all around the house and the burning incense, but they also have horrible diets and no connection to the true God, but they're definitely going to tell you all about the cosmos and the zodiac and the universe spoke to me. And God bless them. I ain't trying to make anybody sound bad, and I'm not trying to be down on anybody, but this is the same stuff that was happening in Colossae. It's still happening right now. It's just now everybody's more connected and everything is more widespread. But definitely the universe spoke to me, people. Instead of just saying it's God, the creator of everything, that they are true, they're acknowledging it. And, you know, some of that science even has its place, acknowledging the gravitational pulls or the sounds or whatever it is that God put in place to keep things where they're at. Because in this book, it also says that through Jesus, all things are held together. We'll go through a little more about that in a second. But whatever it is that holds it all together, whatever power that is through God, okay, and through the Son of God that was there in the beginning when all things were created through him and for him, that instead of giving that a thought and instead of giving that some research, these people were more involved in the universe and the cosmos, right? And the angels and the elements and the seasons and how all of this affects the human physical, and they thought that they could translate that into some type of spiritual understanding, when in all reality they're just worshiping and following and giving all of their homage and all of their attention and research to the physical, and assuming that it was doing something for the spiritual. But this is just knowledge, and it might not even be godly knowledge, and if it is, it's being twisted. And then, of course, there's the higher power conversation. People that won't talk about God, but yet they believe in a so-called higher power. And I think even like certain institutions that want to help you quit drinking alcohol, I won't name it because I don't want to get sued or something weird, but even certain organizations that are put together to supposedly help you quit drinking and telling you that as long as you have a higher power, even if that higher power is yourself, man, they're almost practicing in on this same borderline Gnosticism, Mithraic cult of the angels type of philosophy. Okay, it's philosophy versus the power of God. And it's almost like this allergic reaction to knowing scripture, to taking the time to read it, to do the research, and to know that that so-called higher power has a name. And we've been over how to spell that name. That's great, Yod He Vav He, however you choose to pronounce it. So eventually, all of this area, right, all of this that we just talked about, it gets standardized. And it gets standardized into this thing called Yazdanism. Yazdanism is the cult of the angels, which has its connections into the cult of the sun and the moon, which has its ties into Mithraism, and all of it is really gets its origins through Egyptology, through Egypt. Now, the children of Israel went through Egypt. They would know the best what it's all about. The sun, the moon, the stars, the angels, putting people in places of godly presence. Why? Because the enemy from the beginning also knows the story, people, and he can set out people to twist prophecy and to try to become imposters. So yes, of course, all of this starts to infiltrate Christianity and even Islam. And if you don't agree, well, let's just go to the map again. So this is the map we've been using. Colossae is here. Now, right down the road from them is this big area is where the Kurds were. Now, everything that we just discussed, what do the Kurds have to do with Colossae, you might say? Proximity. That's what it has to do with it, proximity. Because, here we go. The name Yazdanism, or cult of the angels, is a variation of the Kurdish name of one of its isolated branches, Yezidism, which literally means the Anglicans. Why does that matter? Let's talk about this influence, right? If this is such an insignificant church and such an insignificant letter that's, and I've read multiple sources citing it as such, then what's happening in Colossae, which has also become standardized in the land of the Kurds, known as Yazdanism, okay, has also, you could say, has influenced all the way over to Britain, because the name of their church is the Anglican Church. The cult of the angels, of Yazdanism. And you might say, well, the Anglican Church not named that because of that. It has nothing to do with it. They were separating from the Romans and the Catholic. Yeah, I know that story. I just don't buy every narrative that's thrown at me by the guy who wrote it. I do all of my research, and I've even done this same opposing research on the Bible, and that's why I'm here giving these lectures, because I've been confirmed in this. My faith has been confirmed, and I've experienced the grace of God. So look, here we go. Let's bring up another map really quick. Right here, you can see Mithraism, which has its ties to the cult of the angels, which is Yazdanism, which has its ties to the cult of the sun and the moon, which all spawns pretty much its origins in Egypt. And I'm going to keep repeating that so we just understand what we're talking about here, okay? Mithraism. You can see that it's hot on the coattails of Christianity everywhere that it spread. And up there in Britain, look at that. Mithraism it's got 5 major dots all the way up to the north wall of Britain. So yes, the stuff that Paul was telling the people in Colossae it's like following Christianity and Judaism all around the map. Look right here, the land of the Kurds. Imagine that, where it got standardized into something called Yazdanism. Look at it. You can see Judaism, Christianity, and Mithraism all right there, just swimming all around all over each other. And we know that the Israelites already had a problem not staying true to God throughout the whole book of the Judges, okay, during the time period where they had judges and not a king. And also whenever they become Hellenized by the Greeks. And so this is no mystery, pun intended. It's no mystery that all of it's been mingling and smashing together. And Colossae is just to the left of this place on the map. It's a very close proximity. So of course, these schools of thought and these mystery cults were all over this area. Except in Colossae, they must have really just been really, really into that, because he addresses it with them. Not to be worshiping angels. And if you don't think, like I said, if you don't think that this school of thought and all this stuff has infiltrated Christianity, well, first of all, Paul wouldn't have addressed the church at Colossae about it. And second, just look at the artwork of some of this stuff that claims to be, but let me just say this, artwork and artists and all that, they don't speak for Christianity. They don't. They speak for artists, and artists have a long hallway of doorways to walk through whenever they're thinking of what they're going to paint, draw, make, whatever. So it makes them an artist. They're very creative. And a lot of times they can just take something they've seen, something they've heard, or something that they're deeply passionate about, and they'll create artwork about it. And if they believe themselves that they are a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or anything, well, then that's the work that they're going to claim they're producing. So anyway, here it is. Look, we've got the sun, the moon, the stars, the angels. Okay, doing strange thing like collecting Jesus's blood. You can explain this to me in any number of ways you want to. I would not say this is good doctrine. This type of artwork. So anyway, this falls under the cult of angels, in my opinion, and Gnosticism. We'll go over that in a minute. A lot of people know what this painting is. Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. Again, an artist that does not speak for Christianity, even if he considered himself to be a Christian. That doesn't matter to somebody like me. Now, you've seen this photo, but have you ever seen these markings on it? This is something that's kind of popular right now. This is going around, and they'll say that Jesus never existed, that it's all just a metaphor about the sun, the planets, the zodiac, and the seasons. Well, again, you're actually misinterpreting some guy's painting, which he painted this stuff here. And yeah, it might mean that to him, but that just says that he doesn't actually speak for the gospel. He speaks for pseudoscience. And this guy is into some other things. He too, like all of his predecessors that are caught up into this type of mystery cult, have misinterpreted God's signs, God's summons, the reason that we're on the earth in this particular location, moving around the way that we do, to be able to witness the stars and the other gases in the sky from the perspective that we do, is because God has a sign and a calendar for us, true. But all of this other stuff that you can compile on top of it is just you not seeing the breadcrumbs and connecting the dots to the glory of God. You would rather connect it to the glory of pseudoscience, philosophy, and the knowledge of somebody's brain. Here's another point. Jesus Christ, the so-called Son of God, with the S-U-N, sun in the sky. Ancient cosmology and early Christian symbolism. That doesn't mean these folks were real Christians doing all that. That's something that we have to remember. So when it comes to Islam, you can tell me all the stories you want. I've already done all the research. I heard what you have to say. But let's just state the facts. Here we go. The moon and a star. Yes, I know what it's about. However, we talk about the cult of angels, because then again, there's also the Kaaba, the big black cube that everybody takes a journey to, and to go around circles and circles. But did you know about the black cube cult? And about the cube of Saturn with the hexagram that is supposedly at the head point on Saturn, and then it will also create a cube when you superimpose it over a square and all this other stuff. But also in certain schools of thought that Saturn equals Satan. The black cube and the star and the moon and the Saturn and the we're still stuck on the subject of the cult of angels, Yazdanism being a pre-Islamic religion as well. It all has it's all swimming around in the same area, all infecting each other, all influencing each other, not staying true to the doctrine of simplicity. Now, how all of those things connect is a completely different lecture. Okay, they don't directly connect with each other. They connect with each other in this way. The same way the term speed up also means accelerate. Okay, two completely different terms, but they roundabout mean the same exact thing. And now what we're talking about is this entire area here. The whole world essentially has now been infected with what he was telling in this little short 4-chapter letter to the Colossians. which is a pretty big deal. And he only mentions it for a little minute because he doesn't have to go into this big dissertation like I just did, because the people he's addressing, they know exactly what he's talking about. And all of it, it could almost be considered a subset of Gnosticism, which is a mystery cult. And if you remember what we went over during the Gospels, we talked about Simon Magus and or Simon Maga, Simon the magician, Simon the sorcerer. And before it was called Gnosticism, but what he had developed out of his ways and out of his trying to imitate Jesus and the disciples, he created, basically, some people accredit him as the father to Gnosticism. And if that's the guy that all of this stuff is pretty much birthed out of, and whatever he was studying that came before him is everything that is all swimming around in this area, and Paul is addressing them in Colossae in one tiny little verse because they know exactly what he's talking about. Now, there are certain things called Gnostic Christians or the Gnostic Gospels, but did you know that a lot of people from a long time ago that considered themselves Christians were actually Gnostics? And that a lot of Gnostics, now let me not say a lot, but some Gnostics actually exclude Jesus the Messiah from their teachings, but they do include John the Baptist. It can get pretty strange, and then you can just get lost completely in the sauce, where some Gnostics are just teaching Jewish magic, and we've been over those rituals and things before in the past. So they relate even if they don't directly relate. The same way drill rap isn't the same thing as like 80s rap. It's still rap, but it's completely different ends of the spectrum. So back to it in Colossians 2, he said, let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. Colossians 1 verse 9. For this reason, I'm going backwards now. I wanted to start there, and now I'm going back into verse 1. And it all still kind of links together. I'm like basically playing remix the Colossians letter right now. For this reason, we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. So he's telling them, man, I want y'all to know about God's will and the wisdom and spiritual understanding. And not trying to just understand this stuff that you think you can see and know about. Now, Colossians 1, verse 13, jump down. He says, he has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. Now, Ray, when he says the Son of his love, let's go back to what basically what they know Paul's talking about when he tells them about this whole worshiping of angels things and how many tiny doctrinal points that can come up in their mind. The Son of his love. Well, you talk about the Son. Well, see, that's what they mean by the Son of God. It's the sun in the sky. No, it's not. That game only really works when you're speaking English. English might have swarmed the planet, but the planet does not swarm around English. I'm sorry. When you go to Greek, phonetically, the two words, they don't sound the same. And they almost get there with Greek, but it ain't the same. It's not a homophone like sun and sun. Even in Latin, the Roman language, two completely different phonetic words, Filius and Solus. They sound nothing alike. The sun in the sky and the son of a father, even in Hebrew, Ben and Shemesh. Those two words are completely different phonetically, guys. The whole sun and sun, the sun in the sky is the son of the father, and, you know, it's the planets or the apostles, and man, kill it. Just end that. That whole word game only works in English, especially whenever we're talking about the four main languages in the Western Hemisphere that we bother to research concerning the Word of God. The Greek language, the Roman language, which was Latin, Hebrew, which most of the Bible was written in, and English, which most of us speak in the Northern Western Hemisphere. And a lot of people speak English all over Europe. Let's just get real. In the Middle East, there's lots of English speakers, lots of English speaking in Africa. So you can play that game with the sun and the sun, but it doesn't hold weight once you start translating from the language it was written in and into other languages. So just get off it. Back to Colossians 1, verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Colossians 2:2. He's talking about he's going to send, but that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, and attaining to all riches of the full assurance of understanding, to the knowledge of the mystery of God, both of the Father and of Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So this is a great point, because remember, all that stuff, the cult of the angels, Gnosticism, MITHRAISM, the cult of the sun and the moon, all that kind of mixing and blending with other things, but blah, 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 blah. What's it called? Mystery cults, mystery religions. Imagine that. So, of course, Paul knows that using this language is going to be palpable to them, even in their language, okay? The mystery of God is what you need to be worried about, the knowledge of that, and both the Father and of Christ. Because, yeah, that is a little bit of a mystery. Like, how do you do that? But in that truth is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. All that other stuff's just going to have you running in circles, sniffing rocks and lighting incense on fire, inviting all your buddies over to smoke a bowl out of your brand new gravity bong. It doesn't get you anywhere. I'm just being real. Like, that's as real as it gets. I see it all the time. I know plenty of people like that. Mystery religion folks, and they don't even know they're a part of the cult. That's the crazy part. He's telling them, you need to come under the assurance, be assured, in the understanding to the knowledge of the mystery of God. He's the one in control of the seasons. He's the one in control of the sun, the moon, and the stars and all that. He's the one that put them as signs and summons and moedim for the true season, not the season of like fall, winter, spring, and summer, but the seasons of his presence, the seasons of the big, great happenings of God. For example, Moses. For example, Jesus. The big, great happenings. Those are also the seasons, the Moedim. And these help us figure out the mystery of God. And yes, even the heavens declare the glory of God, not the glory of itself. Down to verse 8. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him, who is the head of all principality and power. Colossians 3, verse 8. But now you yourselves are put off all of these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds, and you've put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge, according to the image of him who created him. Now, this language here, when he's talking about the image of him who created him, he's not talking about images of statues, images of angels and little trinkets of angels that you put in your pockets and you take it out and you kiss it and assume that it's going to protect you instead of praying to God and asking for protection. He's not talking about those kind of images. He's talking about the same way famous people have an image they have to uphold. That's the image he's referring to. Maybe image was even a bad translation right here in the sense of could have used a better word in English when they translated it. But the point is, you're going to put on the new man, right? Throw that old stuff away, get rid of it, throw that old man away, and bring in the new man that's going to be renewed in the knowledge according to the image of him who created him. Meaning the image, the reputation of God that created Jesus. Okay? Not the reputation of a bunch of pseudoscientists and planetary nerds. Colossians 3:12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering. And then he goes on to tell them, wives, submit to your own husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and do not be bitter toward them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. And fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. So obviously they had some family issues going in Colossae, some jealousy issues. Seems like maybe they were kind of a harsh people towards each other. And Paul's just trying to remind them, don't do that. Don't do that. Wives, submit to your own husbands. Don't be going and asking another man for advice. Don't go meeting another man up under the olive tree so that you can tell him all of your family problems. And that's not a good look. Stick to your family and be good to each other, because that's what we're supposed to be doing as a church, as a collection of people in fellowship about this knowledge and understanding in God that he's talking to them about. That's what we're supposed to be doing as a church, but you got to start inside your house. You got to start inside your house and then bring that attitude out to the church with you, because especially even though some of these people have churches in their houses. So it just makes sense. Colossians 4:6, he says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. I love that. I love that he says, let your speech be seasoned with salt. Do you know what salt does? It preserves. You can preserve things with salt. Sure can. So if you let your speech be preserved, have preservatives on it, like salt, you could preserve your relationships. You can preserve your own mind by speaking positivity. The power of life and death is in the tongue. You can preserve things. You can pray for people to be healed. There is preservation in the tongue. So let your speech be seasoned with salt. It has the power to preserve. I love that. And now right here, I'm going to close out Colossians and kind of go into a little bonus at the end. So Tychicus, a beloved brother, faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord, he will tell you all the news about me. I am sending him to you for this very purpose, that he may know your circumstances and comfort your hearts with Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you, and they will make known to you all things which are happening here. So basically, he closes out his letter saying, hey, I've got some people that are going to come to you. They're going to tell you all about me, and they're going to set some things straight. And in order with you and for you, they've got some information and some ministering to do to you. But in red, I put there Onesimus. He mentions somebody named Onesimus. Who also mentions Onesimus? The book of Philemon. You know why I'm going to go ahead and talk about Philemon real quick? Because it's one chapter long, literally just one little chapter long. And Philemon, ironically, is in a way centered around Onesimus, because now this letter, Paul's letter to Philemon, is not to a church. It's to a guy, Philemon the person. And he's trying to tell him, well, this is what he's trying to tell him here. Philemon, verse 10. I appeal to you for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten while in my chains, who once was unprofitable to you, but now is profitable to you and to me. and I'm sending him back. You therefore receive him, that is, my own heart, whom I wish to keep with me, that on your behalf he might minister to me in my chains for the gospel. So, real quick, Onesimus is a slave, and it would appear by the language that he ran away or he got sent away, one or the other, being assumed to be useless. And this letter is Paul's way of kind of telling him a few things, but definitely about Onesimus, to let him know, hey, sir, this guy is not useless at all. You know, obviously, Paul kind of is saying that he's his son, like he adopted him, even while Paul is there in his chains, in the slavery to God and to Christ. So, and that a good servant is his work. You can see the work, you can see it, you can see the fruit of that tree. And he's trying to tell Philemon, this is a good guy. I wanted to keep him with me so that he could minister to me in my chains for the gospel. So that kind of gives you a clue that this man, even though he's a slave, he has something to offer spiritually inside of his mind, inside of his heart. This guy can probably talk a good game, and he's definitely about the service, because unfortunately he is in servitude. But he says, but without your consent, talking about to send him back, send Onesimus back to Philemon. He says, but without your consent, I wanted to do nothing, that your good deed might not be by compulsion, as it were, but voluntary. For perhaps he departed for a while for this purpose, that you might receive him forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, but how much more to you, both in flesh and in the Lord. So he's saying, you thought this guy was useless, but I could tell you right now, this is a good guy. You know, maybe there's something wrong with you, Philemon. Like this guy, he's good for you as a friend, as a brother, as a minister in the gospel. And apparently he's good at doing stuff for you too, because he's here with me. But I'm going to send him back. Paul even goes on to say that even if this guy owes you something, you could put it on my tab. I'll take care of it. Basically, he's telling Philemon in this letter, I don't care what your beef is with this guy. I don't care if you think he's worthless. I'm sending him back to be with you, because now guess what? Maybe you're the worthless one. And this guy needs to really enhance you in the way through the gospel that you really need. And he's letting him know, like, I'm telling you this. I'm Paul. And if you have respect for me, I'm telling you, I'll pay whatever he owes you, put it on my tab, I'll handle it. But you need to treat this guy the right way, and not because you're feeling compelled by me to do it, but you need to do it voluntarily, because that's your duty to God, actually. And that's pretty much what he's talking about in Philemon. So what does PBS have to say about slaves in the Roman times? It said all slaves and their families were the property of their owners, who could sell or rent them out at any time. Their lives were harsh. Slaves were often whipped, branded, or cruelly mistreated. Their owners could also kill them for any reason and would face no punishment. Now, you might be saying, now, Chris, what did you just say? In Roman times, you just said earlier Colossae was in Turkey, modern-day Turkey. Yeah, that's right, but don't forget, this is the Roman Empire. Now, this is a little while after Paul's death, but trust me, that area where Colossae is was certainly under Roman control. So the rules apply. So Onesimus was subjected to this type of definition of slavery, and that's according to PBS, by the way. So Onesimus was subjected to that type of behavior, that type of system, knowing that that's the law of him over him. And Paul is trying to tell Philemon, no, you ain't gonna treat Onesimus like that. Don't do that. Okay. And there's a lot more to be learned in both of these books, in Colossians and in Philemon. But of course, I'm just doing overview and giving some more contextual understanding. So whenever you do read the Bible by yourself in these two books, then you're going to have a little more ammo. You're going to have a little more resource to understand exactly who and why he's talking to them like that. Amen. And that'll conclude this lecture on Paul's letter to the Colossians and to his buddy Philemon.